I mean, the main thing is that your body's out of the way. I mean, there are nuances.
Okay.
If you've meditated a long time and have a bunch of skills, you'll notice that it's energetically different. And, but the main thing is that seated meditation promotes, alertness. And so, that's the main reason why you would do it seated, because it's very hard for most people to just even stay awake if you lie down for an hour and try to meditate.
Yeah.
But if that's not happening for you, if you're comfortable and you can get your body sort of not being a problem, because that's one of the biggest hindrances, right? Is just being comfortable. You could take a shallow exhale without moving your belly.
Mm-hmm.
Like your belly kind of stays in the same place and
Yeah.
you don't use your musculature.
Mm-hmm.
So I would either do that exercise or I do it just like maybe standing and exhaling into a forward bend. But don't overthink it. Just inhale for 3, exhale for 4, then inhale for 3, do that a few times, and then
Mm-hmm.
exhale for 5. You can control ratios of your breath. So my guess is you're doing one of a few things, but the most likely thing people do is the inhale's too long. So you've enhanced your inhale so much that like you kind of, it feels like your exhale's really short,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you did that. The other possibility is that you're not using your muscles. So it's like you're having trouble doing it without that cueing. The other way to do it is to, once you do it for a while with just your belly, but then flip it and do it with your pelvic floor. So the exhale has your pelvic floor moving in and up, and your belly will kind of move along with it because your pelvic floor moves your transverse abs. So if you breathe in, for 4, say, and now I'm exhaling and I'm slowly engaging my pelvic floor. Don't yank it. You know what I mean? Just like nice and easy with the muscles, just like you did with your belly, and you'll feel the sides of your abdominal muscles start to move, start to contract.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do it that way too. And that's a little different because it's not so much like rectus abdominis based, and it's more like what you do just for regular breathing. So you could try it that way as well. So you can play with those two things. If you're in a more like acute anxiety thing, or you're sort of like off and you're having trouble, better to make sound. So you ohm that exhale out and it'll do some of the same things. So if you just om, you sing, you're kind of singing it out, and it forces you to use, doesn't force you, but generally prompts you to use those muscles again. And so if you're thinking about extending the sound instead of extending your breath, you are extending your breath out, but the sound will help. So you could try that. So if you're feeling like you're kind of off and you're, getting it into your head, you're like, I can't exhale. Like that's how I would do it. I would think about it more like chanting and forget all the other stuff. So that's another way that might work. Most things, as a yoga therapist, I will say so many things are solved by doing it a different way. So it's just something to think about. Like if you can't get a client to inhale and bring their arms wide, you can't get them to move the way you want, you have to think about a different cue. You can't just keep like hammering it over the head. So, sometimes like I'll have people snap or clap or touch both shoulders, like something to change their brain while they're doing the other thing I want to get them to do. If that makes sense. So sometimes you just got to change the channel, especially if you're in session, because this is a moment probably everyone will encounter if you haven't already, where you're trying to get someone to do something and you can't. And like, you kind of go back in and you say the same things to them thinking like, well, maybe this will work, and it doesn't work. And you get a little flustered because you're like, oh gosh, what am I going to do now? I'm about to get found out. I'm a terrible yoga therapist. I don't know what to do. And what you should think to yourself is cue them in some other way, like get their brain to do anything different, tap their foot, anything. And usually it works out. I even do it in like, sometimes people, like, they're on their belly, say you want them to bring their heel towards their glute. You know, you want them to engage their hamstring, and they have whatever going on. It's like they can't really fire properly. Sometimes, like, if I just remember this one person, it's like, okay, that's not working. I've said it 7 times. You know what I mean? They're not doing it, but I know they can do it. So then I had him tap on the floor, his right hand. And now I'm like, bring your foot to your butt. You know, like literally, like I kind of yelled at him and he goes, you know, I was like, okay, good. Like, and then everything started working again. So it's the same thing with the breath, right? Just find another way. Foundations, it's because they tend to work on more people. The iRest stuff is really complicated. It's very wordy, and there's a lot of learned techniques in there. I like to keep it simple as a yoga therapist, you know, and so I try to use things that most people have been able to do, you know, from my experience. So that's why. I have also noticed that iRest, I don't know what you're learning right now, but a lot of amazing things in there. But it's also kind of evolved into this meditation tradition almost. It's like an interesting thing. It's like its own kind of thing. So they use a lot of different cueings, and they'll use a lot of different cueing within each Yoga Nidra. That's what I've noticed. And so I found that unless you're doing really long ones, it doesn't leave quite enough space for my liking for people to have their own experience. I'm sure they would disagree. But it's not that I don't like them, and I've done tons of iRest, but those would be the differences, you know? So those are just things to think about. Though that particular technique is sort of like a love it or hate it thing. I've noticed some people like love iRest. It's like so awesome for them, and their brain really likes that. And other people find it irritating. So, you know, as you're studying it, you know, it's good to like think about how much time, how much visualization, how much talking in general. There's the rotational Saraswati is like rotational consciousness, which is iRest got that from there, where you're doing different images. So if you listen to Swami Saraswati, if you haven't listened to this, it's super fun. You can go on YouTube and type in Swami Saraswati, and you'll get a live. He's like talking through some sort of PA system, and he's like, he gets to this visualization part, and it's rotating your consciousness. So they do it in the body, right? You go to different parts of your body, and then it goes to your mind. And he's like, a red chair, and he's like, a boy under a mango tree, an eagle, or whatever. You know what I mean? A sunny river, or sunny, and he just goes and goes and goes. And it's a really cool technique because it's doing that same thing I was just talking about. It's kind of just like switching and switching and switching. So, you know, it changes it keeps you awake and in like a meditative state, and like sort of doesn't really allow you to think that much, which was the idea, right? Because you're too busy. So that's super useful. And then there's like the visualizations that are more like, you know, imagine a white light in your heart and birds chirping in the white light, and there's a flute playing and the whole thing. And that's more designed to like change your mind state out of negative bias into something that's more sattvic, peaceful. And so for a lot of people that works, you know, because sometimes you're lying there and the thoughts are too, you know, difficult, you know, for you to really have any kind of brainwave state changing meditative experience. That's how I see it. So there's just different methods of doing that. And then for some people that moving from image to image can be really irritating. Like some people come out of that and they're like, ah, like stop it. You know, I hated that. I can tell you my own experience, which is because I've worked a lot with Yoga Nidra just in my own practice. And I like the rotational consciousness and visualizations if the Yoga Nidra is short. And I'm sort of just trying to change the channel and get my brain to do something else. If you're really trying to deepen your practice and really let your system change a lot, once you've done that for a while, it's sort of keeps you on the surface. It won't let you drop down because there's just too much talking and too much direction. So a lot of meditations like that. So that's been my experience. Like if you're like kind of floating in your pranic body and then someone's like rolling in every 15 seconds telling you to hear the birds chirping in your soul, it's like irritating, you know, because it's like pulling you out. But that doesn't mean it's not a good technique. Well, for me anyway, it's like the joy of Yoga Nidra, right? Is like you get this sort of like different than other meditations. Like you get this very simple, easy, you're lying down, they're telling you what to do. You know, it's easy to get out of your own way. But I started integral yoga and you basically do the same one over and over and over and over again. And I feel like that's been a little lost in like the sort of more recent yoga world. Like everything needs to be different all the time. And it's part of the problem. I mean, you want your client to like get better at it and, you know, be able to drop in, and the more kind of accustomed you are to something, the better it is. So I don't really see the benefit. It's fine to, oh, you want to do another one? Here's like another one. Like I have like 5, I basically give people. But when your client starts going, I want more and more and more new, you have to think to yourself, you have to talk to them. You have to be like, well, what are you looking for? Are you bored? Because if you're bored, you're not getting the experience that you're not having the brainwave shift that we're looking for that provides the benefit. So maybe that wasn't the right one in the first place. That's one possibility. But you don't want them to you don't want them to think that that's like, if you're like, oh, okay, I'll find you 10 more, then you're sort of playing, you're not teaching them anything, you know? They're like, oh, great, my yoga therapist told me I should do 55 different Yoga Nidras every week, you know, which is now that's probably not what you meant to do. So the client's not really the boss that way because they aren't a yoga therapist and they don't have that piece of information. But I do this like one right now, like corporate meditation teaching thing. We meet online and they're like super high powered exec types and they wanted me to teach them meditation. And, you know, some of them are like, let's do something like that. It's like that. They're like, I do teach them new things, but, you know, I'm like, look, guys, we can't do 500 new things that's not how it works. You have to get better at what you're doing. And when I said that to them, they were like, oh, I never thought of it that way. So you as a yoga therapist, the only way to work, because you're going to land where you are right now over and over again, because it's just too hard. So you have to make it easier on yourself. So the way you make it easier is she's like, I'm stuck. I can't get up. I'm not motivated. Mindset. You have to say to her, well, what I'm hearing is, you know, you're not motivated, maybe a little depressed. You're feeling restricted in your body and blank, whatever the things are those the things you want to work on? And you literally, like, for yourself, when she leaves, you write them down, you know what I mean? Or while she's there, you're like, okay, you know, physical ability, you know, like less pain in the body, like even make that a little more specific. Like, are you in pain or are you depressed and just don't want to move? Like, which is, you know, you have to like separate that out with her. Like, okay, what am I going to give her for depression? And what are the symptoms of her depression? because even depression's a little too general, right? Is she not getting up in the morning? Is she not motivated to clean her house? Like, she'll tell you stuff, right? So whatever it is that she's like, this is the thing that I can tell I'm more depressed because I look in my kitchen, I haven't done dishes in 4 days or whatever. Let's say you give her like a breathing practice and a moving practice for that, and you get her to do that 3 times a week. What you'd want to see is that after 3 or 4 weeks, you ask her, how's that dishes thing going? Because she could come back and she could say, I'm still depressed and I still have lupus, right? Because that's going to be her reality, because that's what's happening. But you say to her, well, when we talked a few weeks ago, you mentioned the dishes. And then she says to you, yeah, that's gotten a little better. I'm generally doing the dishes. Do you see why we're getting this specific? Right. And then you're like, great, clearly that practice is working, because 3 weeks ago you told me you never did your dishes for the past 5 years. And then your client goes, oh, right? And then you start getting this like feedback, positive feedback loop with her. And then you do the next thing and the next thing. I would say like 50% of your job is probably talking about people's schedules and specific symptoms. It's like such a big part of it. Really finding out what we're actually dealing with instead of just taking the diagnosis at face value. And it's complicated with things like depression, because depression means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So one thing to remember is that we're not actually working on Western diagnosis exactly. It's difficult for people. I mean, think about yourself. Like it's likely that you have had many times in your life where you didn't feel like you had any power over what was going on for you. And like, even though you're a yoga person, you didn't think, well, maybe I should do some yoga stuff. You know, you're like, I'm going to go get someone to help me and do some other thing. Because that it's almost like too simple and like a little unbelievable, you know, that some breathing things and some moving things and some meditation things can actually have such a big impact. And so for clients, it's even more so because they don't even know about it. So it's like really hard to buy in sometimes. There's also this weird thing. It's like, well, if it's that easy, it's not easy, but you know, this is how it goes in the mind, right? Well, if it's that easy, then I've been like such a fool for the past 10 years, you know, being anxious, you know, that I don't even really want to confront that by doing something about it. So it's a little bit of a difficult thing. I'm noticing that there's like in the yoga world, as it kind of begins to meld with Western stuff, it's almost unbelievable. Like when you look at some of the studies where you see some of our interventions come out the same as medications, for instance, like they'll literally like be like a statistical tie for like depression. It's hard to believe, you know, we have such a faith in pharma at this point because it's done so many amazing things that it's almost made it hard for us to be like, wow, I could like get on a yoga mat 3 times a week and I could get the exact same results as Paxil, you know, like it's just, I'm betting even like some of us here are hearing that right now and we're like, no, like, you know what I mean? But it's actually true. They've studied it. So it's hard. It's hard for people to get there. In the UK, they changed their protocols for mild and moderate depression. The health service changed them several years ago from medication. They switched people out to exercise and therapy. So they really like flipped the script on even moderate depression because they studied it and found that if you get someone on a treadmill, like 4 times a week or whatever it was for 30 minutes and had them talk to somebody every 2 weeks, they were getting better results than any meds. But it's interesting. And it took, took years and years and years and years and years of research and thinking about this stuff to get there. Basically almost unfunded research on yoga and exercise, like all the other things. It took so many years to get there.